Sherry, over to you.
Thanks so much, Alistair. Warm greetings from Arlington, Virginia. My name is Sherry Mueller, and it's my privilege to serve along with Joel Fishman as co-president of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. It's also my privilege to welcome each and every one of you to this Zoom webinar, this First Monday Forum featuring Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. In addition to PDCA, there are several co-sponsors: the USC Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy, as well as the George Washington University Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communications. I want to say a special thank you to our primary tech host and moderator, PDCA Rising Professional, Alistair Somerville. Alistair wears a variety of hats, including serving as a fellow at the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. Also want to say a special thank you to our backup tech host and key person, Claudia Del Pozo, the Hans Tom Tuck Graduate Fellow at PDCA. The program today, for those of you who know me, know it would be dear to my heart because I've been a strong proponent of citizen diplomacy since serving as president of Global Ties, the private sector organization that serves as a partner to our State Department in the administration of the International Visitor Leadership Program. It is a classic example of the intersection of public diplomacy and citizen diplomacy. The notion that the individual has a responsibility to help shape foreign affairs. Citizen diplomacy comes in multiple forms. For example, Sister Cities International describes itself as a legacy nonprofit that focuses on President Eisenhower's mission of citizen diplomacy. And Sister Cities is one of the organizations that emerged from the White House Summit on Citizen Diplomacy that President Eisenhower hosted in 1956. Just last week in New York City, there was a global citizen summit put on by an organization founded in Australia in 2008 that has 11 million ordinary citizens on an app communicating with their leaders. In 2021, I had the honor of interviewing Ambassador Kenneth Quinn for a chapter that I co-authored with Paul Lachevrier in a book entitled, A Research Agenda for Public Diplomacy. And last June, I had the very special privilege of meeting with Ambassador Quinn in Des Moines and having a tour of the Hall of Laureates that he conceived and made sure was constructed that spotlights the recipients of the World Food Prize, as well as describes some of the Iowa citizen diplomacy initiatives that are such good examples. You've already seen his bio. You know Ambassador Quinn has had a distinguished career in the US Foreign Service that concluded with his serving as our ambassador to Cambodia. After that, he spent 20 years as president of the World Food Prize, is now President Emeritus, and is helping the current occupant of that position get acclimated, working with Ambassador Terry Branstad. Ambassador Quinn, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today that demonstrate the power of citizen diplomacy. Ken, over to you.
Well, Sherry, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. It's so wonderful to be part of this program today and to share some of my stories and experiences, just as I shared them with you when you came to visit. And I found, in my career as an American diplomat and then as the president of a significant non-governmental 501c3 organization, the World Food Prize Foundation, and then most recently as a strategic advisor volunteer with the U.S. Heartland China Association, that my public diplomacy experiences have been slightly different. And speaking about them can kind of give a sense of the different types of public diplomacy. I want to begin, though, by sharing a story with everyone in the audience that I shared with Sherry when she visited me in June of 2021, and which I believe conveys the impact that citizen diplomacy can have. And it's a story about how in 2021, the newly arrived ambassador of China, His Excellency Qin Gang, who is now the foreign minister of China, when he arrived in the United States, after he presented his credentials at the State Department, the first Americans with whom he had any public exchange were not the leadership of the Congress. It was not leaders of major American business organizations that have operations in China, wasn't with other diplomats. He had a public meeting via Zoom with two people in Iowa, both of whom were retired and held no position of any significance. And he spent 70 minutes speaking with those two individuals. One of them was a woman from Muscatine, Iowa, named Sarah Landy. And the other Iowan with whom he spoke on that Zoom call was me. Now, why Ambassador Qin Gang made that call to us, he explained that before he left China en route to Washington to take up his new duties, President Xi Jinping had him come to his office and told him that one of the very first things he must do when he arrives in the United States was to contact the two of us and convey his personal greetings and good wishes, as well as those of his wife, to Sarah Landy and to me. Now, Sarah Landy has a unique role in the history of American citizen diplomacy and our citizen diplomacy legacy with China. She was one of the families who in 1985, when 31-year-old Xi Jinping, who was then a county-level party official in Zhengding County in Hebei province, came as part of a corn processing delegation to the United States. And 5 or 6 individuals, they had the opportunity to meet with then Governor Terry Branstad, brand new governor of the state of Iowa, and then to travel around the state and spend several days in Muscatine, which is a small city of about 30,000 people on the Mississippi River in southeast Iowa. And you know, the Iowans are known for Iowa nice. We're open and welcoming, and those families, including Sarah Landy, welcomed Xi Jinping and his those traveling with him into their homes. They kind of put their kids out of their room and sent them to the basement to sleep, and gave Xi Jinping the room of one of their sons. And it made such an incredible impression, this long-lasting impression, so that in 2012, when as vice president of China, Xi Jinping returned to Iowa, he first went to Sarah Landy's home. There's this incredible photo of him standing by the fireplace, speaking. There's still Governor Branstad, you know, the longest serving governor in the history of the United States of America was there. Sarah Landy and her husband are sitting there. And Xi Jinping is saying to them, "You're my old friends. And to me, you are America." This is an incredible moment. That evening, he flew to Des Moines. This was February 15th, 2012. And Governor Branstad hosted a state dinner, an Iowa state dinner in his honor, and giving the toast. Usually toasts in diplomatic settings, they're very structured. You read a script and give the toast, and they're meant to convey special words. And Xi Jinping had such a script, but in the middle of his toast, he goes off script and starts talking about how he remembers Muscatine. And he quotes Mark Twain, and he speaks of his memory of seeing the sun over the Mississippi River in Muscatine. And I have to tell you, I was there. It was so incredibly powerful to hear a man who would soon be the leader of his country speak about our country in that way. If you ever wondered about the power and impact of personal citizen diplomacy, it was in that moment. The next day, Xi Jinping, and he's got the foreign minister of China with him, the minister of agriculture, he's with Secretary of Agriculture and former Iowa Governor Tom Vilsack, with Governor Branstad. They all arrived here at the Hall of Laureates, that building you see behind me. And I have my moment when I get to escort Xi Jinping into the building. And as we were walking in through the interpreter, I said, "Mr. Vice President, you have such an interesting story about how you came to Iowa as a young man. I'm going to commission a painting and hang it here in my building so that people will remember your story." And through the interpreter, Xi Jinping says to me, "Thank you very much. That's very nice." And then I said to him, "And by the way, Mr. Vice President, I just shook your hand, and I'm one of the very, very few Iowans to shake your hand, but also shook your father's hand when I escorted your father around Iowa in 1980. And Xi Jinping literally stopped in his tracks, and he turned and looked at me, and his eyes got big, and he got a big smile on his face. And through the interpreter, he said, "You have two interesting stories." So at the bottom of that painting that hangs here in the Hall of Laureates, it says in Chinese characters, "Two interesting stories." So as I told Ambassador Qingang all of this in our 70-minute Zoom call right after his arrival, it conveyed to him this unique connection that Iowa has to the Xi family, because Xi Jinping's father, when he came in 1980, it was the first delegation of Chinese governors coming to America after we established diplomatic relations. And of course, didn't know at the time that his father was the father of the future president of China, but he was the leader of the delegation. Xi Zhongsun was his name. Governor Xi Zhongsun was the governor of Guangdong province. And he was the leader, along with paramount leader Deng Xiaoping, of China's adopting free market economics. He was the man who established the Shenzhen special zone, where modern economics and business economics were introduced. And we took him out to see farms and agricultural institutions here. And they soon adopted the free market principles to agriculture, transforming Chinese agriculture in 1 decade. And so this moment when China was taking off, I had the opportunity to take his father around and show him and introduce him for the first time ever, to American free market economics. And so I said to Ambassador Qingang, now next year, 2022, will be the 10-year anniversary of Xi Jinping's coming to this building. We held the US high-level China Agricultural Symposium. We should do that again. We should have another event and here, and with agriculture at the heart of it, because the relations between the US and China had deteriorated so badly since 2012. And it was almost impossible to organize meetings in the capital cities, like in Beijing or Washington, because the politics was so toxic. But perhaps recalling this citizen diplomacy and having non-governmental organizations organize something could be a way of improving relations. So I want to sort of figuratively push the pause button on this discussion of China and explain to you kind of a second story about, well, what was I, a foreign service officer, doing in Iowa in 1980? And that because why wasn't I assigned someplace, overseas where career diplomats go? And I had the first 10 years of my career, I had spent a little over 5 years in Vietnam during the war. I had been on the at the National Security Council staff at the White House as the Vietnam War ended on April 30th, 1975. Yesterday was the anniversary of that tragic, terrible day. And then I worked for Assistant Secretary Richard Holbrooke for a year and a half. So all my career had been focused on Indochina, the Vietnam War. But I had 10 years in, so I was eligible to be a Pearson Fellow. And a Pearson Fellowship was another, I don't think it was started with the idea of citizen diplomacy, but by Senator Pearson of Kansas, it was to kind of re-Americanize diplomats who have been overseas too long, get you back to remember the people you represent. So I signed up, and there I was on the staff of Governor Robert Ray of Iowa, Republican governor, one of the truly great humanitarians in the history of our state and indeed our country. And Governor Ray had been very interested and involved in resettling refugees from Indochina. There were about 130,000 refugees who fled Indochina at the end of the war in 1975. But now here I was arriving in late 1978, and in January of 1979, I was in the governor's office with him when we watched a TV special featuring Ed Bradley, CBS Reports. And it was a report on the Vietnamese boat people refugees who are now escaping from Vietnam in increasingly large numbers, sailing down rivers and out into the South China Sea, desperately trying to find a way to live in freedom. And they would make their way to Malaysia or to Thailand or Philippines, but wherever they went, no country wanted to accept them because no country was taking any more refugees. And even countries in Southeast Asia, they would maybe give them some water, food, or gasoline, but push them back out to sea and say, go someplace else because you can't stay here, because none of them wanted to be inundated with refugees. And in Ed Bradley's report, we saw one of those boats pushed back out in the waves, and suddenly this boat breaks up. And before your eyes, you see Vietnamese boat people, refugees, literally drowning out in these turbulent seas. And it was such an incredible scene. Those lucky few who washed up on the shore, Ed Bradley literally dropped his microphone, rushed down to pick them up, to try to drag them up onto shore and save them. Governor Ray was so affected by that. And he asked me, why is this happening? You came from the State Department, explain this to me. And I explained that after the war, we had taken 130,000 refugees here. Our doors were closed. America was taking no more refugees. That night at midnight in his office, we drafted the letter to the president, which he read before in a press conference the next day saying, Mr. President, Iowa will double the number of refugees we've already taken if you will just reopen America's doors. And we went to Washington. You got two other governors, another Republican and Democrat, and lobbied with the president and the State Department to change our policy. And that summer, 5-6 months later, we went with Vice President Mondale to Geneva for the UN conference on the boat people. And Vice President Mondale took the stage and spoke and said America was going to accept 168,000 refugees a year. Now the boat people were saved, and the president sent the Navy to rescue boat people. And it all came from this subnational citizen diplomacy led by governors influencing and who were supported by a huge array of newspapers and religious leaders and other governing officials all across Iowa to bring these refugees here. And when this was announced in Geneva at the UN, America got a spontaneous standing ovation from the world, with the exception, of course, of communist countries who said it's a terrible trick, about our humane and humanitarian policy. So I followed, when I retired after being ambassador, I came back home to Iowa, took over as president of the World Food Prize. I endeavored to build this same type of citizen diplomacy and to impact through our Borlaug Dialogue Symposium. I invited Palestinians and Israelis to come together. And they would come because they were being invited, not they would invite each other, but invited to come because they were invited by our nonprofit organization. And I brought the ministers of agriculture from Afghanistan and Pakistan here. In 2012, we gave our $250,000 prize to Daniel Hillel, an Israeli Jewish irrigation pioneer who had been nominated by 3 Muslim and Arab scientists from Muslim and Arab countries. 2014, we brought senior Iranian scientists here, and I sent World Food Prize laureates, and I went to Iran and promoting agricultural exchanges. I found that agriculture, and you were able to do things in the heartland that you couldn't do in capitals because it was citizen diplomacy. And so in 2022, now as I was strategic advisor to the US Heartland China Association, only 3 or 4 person organization led by former Missouri Governor Bob Holden. And we had the US-China Agricultural Dialogue. And because we were inviting them, I got Ambassador Nick Burns to participate from Beijing virtually. Ambassador Chin Gan was there in person. And I had the Trump administration ambassador, Ambassador Terry Branstad, a former governor of Iowa, all participating. And we had 200 participants leading individual business and agricultural leaders from the United States. We had others participating virtually from China. And we had this amazing program. And I refer to it as, with 3 ambassadors, we were, had pulled off a diplomatic hat trick in getting them there. But the conversation was not toxic. And we could talk about improving our own agricultural exchanges and how China and the US must collaborate in order to address the single greatest problem that our human race has ever faced, which is, can we sustainably feed sustainably and nutritiously feed the 9 to 10 billion people who will be on our planet by the year 2046, when Iowa celebrates its 200th the bicentennial of statehood, our 200th year as a state. This is the biggest challenge. And it is, as we've learned from Ukraine and Russia, this terrible unjust conflict, that if there is a conflict between the US and China, meeting this goal will be impossible. And even if there is peace, US and China need to collaborate together. And in 2023, earlier this month, we had another US Heartland China Association agricultural dialogue. And at the end, I gave the concluding speech of the event and said, my dream is of having senior leaders, even perhaps the most senior leaders, but senior leaders of China and the United States, come to Des Moines, come to this building, which has the legacy of the Xi family there and the legacy of Norman Borlaug, man who Nobel Peace Prize laureate, one of great citizen diplomacy, man who took this agricultural know-how and spread it around the world. And with their legacy, the United States and China could agree, invited by nonprofit organization, could agree to work together to uplift Africa, which is feeding an additional 1 billion people. So that is my hope, why I believe that legacy of Xi Jinping's visit, of Xi Jinping's father's visit, the legacy of this building, and that citizen diplomacy may be the most important element that we have in order to prevent the possibility of conflict, the increasingly real possibility of conflict between the United States and China, and take us toward making the world a much better place. Thank you for having me there, Sherry. I'm happy to answer questions, talk about other aspects of the US and Iowa's citizen diplomacy legacy, the Khrushchev visit in 1959 to the Garst farm, of how the Yamanashi hog lift, all citizen diplomacy efforts helped maintain, kept the US and the Soviet Union from firing nuclear weapons at each other, helped rebuild US and Japan relationship, how George Washington Carver helped Mahatma Gandhi throw off British colonial rule. These are incredible stories of citizen diplomacy to inspire our people and inspire our country and help shape the more conventional diplomacy, which the State Department has, and I proudly served for 32 years. But citizen diplomacy is so incredibly powerful and impactful. And so thank goodness we have you and others leading the Public Diplomacy Council of America. I'm so honored to be part of a member of that wonderful organization.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Quinn. I think that was really magisterial, how you laid out the role of citizen diplomacy in so many episodes of US foreign policy, and also demonstrating that citizen diplomacy isn't just a nice to have. It's really critical to solving some really big challenges. And you've teed it up nicely for questions, and we welcome, of course, members of the audience to submit their questions via the Q&A box, and we'll share those with Ambassador Quinn. But before we go to those questions, I'd love to turn it over to Paul Lechelier, who is the founder and director of Learning Life and an expert in citizen diplomacy, for the first question. Over to you, Paul.
I don't know if I qualify as an expert in citizen diplomacy, but at least a practitioner. Thank you, Ambassador Quinn, for your really interesting remarks. Sherry has asked me to share with you briefly some things about Learning Life, the organization that I run that does citizen diplomacy. I'm going to be sharing with you via the chat a couple of things that we do, just some general information for those of you who don't know Learning Life about what we do, but with particular emphasis on two things. One is Citizen Diplomacy International, which used to be called Citizen Diplomacy Research Group and was part of the PDCA and is now part of Learning Life. And secondly, the Family Diplomacy Initiative, which is our own initiative to engage people in a new form of citizen diplomacy called family diplomacy. So I'll share that information to the Zoom chat, so you'll have ways to kind of click and learn more. But I want to turn to my question. And so I wrote down this question because I wanted to get it right, Ambassador Quinn, but so your stories about Xi Jinping clearly and colorfully indicate that CD, or citizen diplomacy, can soften hearts. But we also know that geopolitics can harden hearts, easily destroying the years of hard work of citizen diplomats like you and me, building productive, peaceful relationships with the stroke of a few public aggressions by powerful politicians. This seems to me to be one of, if not the gravest vulnerabilities of citizen diplomacy. And coincidentally, this may be most saliently the case with US-China relations, as you're well aware, in which Xi Jinping is implicated or involved. So my question is, how do you think we can address this weakness if Xi Jinping, beneficiary of citizen diplomacy, and US leaders are bent on conflict and really the opposite of citizen diplomacy?
I thank you for that the obvious question about how to take realpolitik and the hard national interests that are involved, and it'd be wrong to ever think that because you've had a good relationship or a special or unique relationship with a leader of another country, that will somehow cause that leader to change their national goals or national interests. That won't happen. In my view, what I believe you hope for is that the experience that citizen diplomacy has provided, and which has impacted a leader, whether it's an American leader or a foreign leader like Xi Jinping, is that it gives you another opportunity to have a conversation, to make another approach, to make another appeal, to go quietly, as long as it's not done publicly, but go quietly and get another opportunity for a conversation at an official level, or that you're able to have some reference to private exchanges, so that messages are passed sort of from a non-government organization to another non-government organization, and in that way then passed on to the leaders. So I have had since 2017 a relationship with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. It's a non-governmental think tank, huge organization, sort of a think tank and graduate school, but quite influential. And you're able to discuss ideas there and put forward ideas there that governments may not be able to address, or not in the same way. You can bring out and have other ways of looking at problems that can be surfaced and get attention. Also can be done through the press. The China Daily are, cover events in the United States. They're very interested in citizen diplomacy events. Somebody from Xinhua is going to be here in Des Moines at the end of this week to do some interviews, and they can highlight other aspects. For example, you know that when Speaker Pelosi went to Taiwan, and that set off a lot of demonstration of military exercises and jets and flying in ships and doing things that were meant, in my view, by the People's Republic of China to convey that if Taiwan is thinking about doing anything to try to promote independence or separation from China, that it's going to be met with this type of military response, perhaps just to sort of circle and economically strangle Taiwan as opposed to having all-out military conflict. But it was all caught a lot of attention. On the front page of Xinhua, or in the main stories, were stories about Xi Jinping understanding what farming and agriculture was all about. And it came to my attention because they had a number of quotes from me in the story. And I'm saying, why would they be running this story so prominently at the same time that Speaker Pelosi's visit is causing so much other attention and military type activities? And to me, I said, maybe it's just a coincidence, but I believe that there is a reasonable way of looking and saying, we're being reminded there is this other track, there is this other set of experiences that we ought to be looking at as a way of building collaboration. I mean, if, a lot's going to depend on China and Taiwan on what happens in the Taiwanese election in January, and which party achieves power and elects a new president. But the if the U.S. and China could be on this terrible collision course, which could result in terrible military confrontation between our two countries and unthinkable consequences. And so I believe that one of the ways that we could avert that would be to try to create a circumstance where you can have senior leaders of both countries saying, let's do something really big together. Let's do something that would have this big positive impact on our whole planet, on all countries, on global food security, on global stability. And in an act of dramatic statesmanship, that the senior leaders of the two countries could come together and create a collaboration where the end results will come a decade from now or 2 decades from now. And could something like that avert this collision course and avert a conflict? My hope is that, and I'm about to go off to China and speak because I hope to continue to propagate this possibility and say there is a way, maybe not in Beijing or Washington, D.C., but maybe, just maybe in the heartland of America, working around the theme that's been at all of my work, peace through agriculture. Pax Agricultura, peace through agriculture. Sorry, but I kind of went on, kind of a long-winded answer, so.
No, great answer to a complex question. Thank you very much. And our second question, before we go to some of the great questions that have come in via the Q&A box, will be from Ambassador Richard LeBaron, who After a distinguished career in the State Department, is now serving on the Advisory Council of Global Ties US. Ambassador LeBaron, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ken, for that really, really fascinating discussion. It was, it really revealed a lot about the potential for citizen diplomacy that, you know, I wouldn't even have imagined. Like you, I had a 30-some year career in the Foreign Service, and throughout that career, I was impressed by the International Visitor Program as an essential tool for embassies to influence people overseas and to make long-term relationships and build those relationships with people at a very early age and see them blossom years and years later. And so I was honored when I was asked to serve on the Advisory Council of Global Ties, which coordinates with local organizations in the United States to sponsor these visitors. What my question revolves around is the local aspect. Most of these organizations that sponsor our international visitors are made up of volunteers. Some get some partial funding from their state or city. They get a little bit of funding from Global Ties, but they're pretty much a ragtag operation of volunteers who just do this out of the goodness of their hearts. And I'm wondering if there's some way to sort of establish a little more consistency, a little more support, and, you know, and also to mobilize these citizen groups to build more of a constituency for both public diplomacy writ large and diplomacy in general. So far, it's a pretty isolated effort for a lot of groups. And I'd just like to see if I'd like to hear your thinking on whether we should just leave well enough alone and rely on people's goodwill, or we should find ways to make a more cohesive effort to influence the future of diplomacy.
Ambassador Quinn, if you wouldn't
Yeah,
mind.
I didn't, I was muted. Yeah, forgive me. So I've seen this, you know, in Iowa and different organizations. You have like sister states and sister cities organizations. We had an Iowa, you know, international center, and they do struggle to get funding. Some will end up sort of being subsumed by state government. It much will depend on, you know, what businesses or what other organizations see them as relevant, and it's not doesn't always the payoff from them isn't always so evident to either those with money to donate or to citizens saying, well, what do we really get from this, and what do we you know, how is this highlighted? So with the World Food Prize, when I came, the World Food Prize was a two-person organization. It had events on one day in the year, and it had maybe 25 or 30 people came from outside Iowa for it. And I thought I had taken on Mission Impossible. But you know, Dr. Norman Borlaug, man who took his miracle wheat to India and Pakistan and to Iran and Egypt when they were all facing mass starvation, and in the 1960s, and his approach to agriculture as seeds were so incredibly life-saving that, you know, farmers and scientists in India put in their money to put up a statue of Norman Borlaug. Same thing, farmers in Mexico, you know, putting up a statue to this gringo from Howard County in Iowa because he's so beloved. I mean, I was invited to go to Iran in 2014 because they were holding a conference just to celebrate the centennial of the birth of Norman Borlaug. And we had just unveiled Borlaug's statue in the US Capitol in Washington, DC. It's right next to Rosa Parks there in Statuary Hall. And the Iranians said, can we buy a copy of your statue? We want to put it up on our campus, agricultural biotechnology campus here just outside Tehran. And I got them from, the ability to do that, although they couldn't get the treasury license, the doing business for Iranians. But, they invited me to go there, and I went there and I gave a talk to, 400 Iranians. There was this mullah sitting in the front row representing the Grand Ayatollah, giving me the evil eye, throughout. And when I finished talking about the potential for Iranians and Americans working together in biotechnology, and send your best scientists to Des Moines this October for our symposium. And I got a spontaneous standing ovation from 400 Iranians. And the mullah, as I walked off the stage, he was an older guy, he ran over to me and shaking my hands. And it was this incredible, moment of the potential of agriculture. If you go to China, wherever you go in China, you can talk to anybody, people in the market selling there, somebody selling coffee on the bullet train, and you ask them, do you know who Yun Longping is? And every Chinese knows who Yun Longping is, just as they know who Xi Jinping. And Yun Longping is the Norman Borlaug of China. He's a man who developed hybrid rice and helped feed millions, hundreds of millions of Chinese at a desperate time. He came to Iowa in 2004 to receive the World Food Prize, our $250,000 prize. So wherever I go, in talking about spirit of agriculture and bringing peace, I say we have the inspirations of Norman Borlaug, we have the inspiration of Yun Longping, and then I usually put in and the inspiration of George Washington Carver, who was also a great Iowa hero. We just enacted a day of recognition in his honor. There's only 3 ever in the history of Iowa. 3, and one of them is a man who was born enslaved and went on to become one of America's greatest agricultural scientists, George Washington Carver. And in referring to the spirit of these individuals, they were all citizen diplomats. I'm sure they never thought of themselves that way, but in fact they are, because they make such impact as individuals with their science, with their new seeds around the world. Agriculture is a great, and I was born in the Bronx, right? I never grew up on a farm. I didn't work in agriculture any time in my life, but I came to see that agriculture is a key. And in these days of terrible divisions in our own country, red states, blue states, et cetera, but you can get the most conservative and the most liberal progressive and bring them together, and they all come into the Hall of Laureates. They all stand in front of Norman Borlaug statues and they all leave wiping tears from their eyes, because agriculture, ameliorating hunger, is something that unites all Iowans, no matter what political party or background they're from.
Thank you for that. And there was a related question in the Q&A box from Michael Olansky. And he asks about maybe a slightly more negative turn in relation to citizen diplomacy and exchange, where he says, in Iowa and elsewhere, to what extent have citizen diplomacy programs been impacted by current problems and challenges in the US? For example, many international visitors have come to American schools to meet students and teachers and discuss their home countries. In light of increased security measures, I'm imagining the questioner is talking about gun violence and other issues, but in light of increased security measures in many schools, are such in-person exchanges becoming more difficult?
I would certainly think they are becoming more difficult. And, you know, when you live outside a country, so when I was living outside the United States, and I'd hear about shooting in Florida or at some rest stops on the interstate, and my kids were going back and we're going to be driving, and I'd be on the phone begging them, don't drive, don't stop on the interstate. People are being shot. Because when you see in the news is all this violence, you think that's happening all the time. And I was, you know, impacted in looking at my own country from afar. So I certainly think that people who are living outside the US but are watching international news, and they must think that every school is being shot up and that American cities are very violent and dangerous to go to. And so I think that must, you know, I think almost certainly that's happening. And it's scary to me. And I have, you know, a couple of grandchildren who live out in Oakland, California. And, you know, I talk to my son and about them, and I worry about that. You know, when I was ambassador in Cambodia, we had no Marines, we had no American security, and my ambassador's residence was hit with a rocket and ringed in gunfire, and we threw our children on the floor, and my wife and I covered them with our bodies. And I'll tell you that you never pray so hard in your life as when you pray that the bullets that will come in through the window will kill you and not your children. And the moment you discover how much you love your children, we were very, very lucky that none of us were hurt, harmed in that. But we, you know, ended up having to evacuate all the American citizens out of the country and most of our embassy staff, but we kept all the Americans safe in those kind of situations. So I do fear terribly. I mean, that you know, this perception of American schools and being dangerous. And you know, in Cambodia, some of the members of what was called the Cambodian People's Party, which is sort of the Communist Party, but these officials, a number of them sent their kids to school in the United States. And that had a profound impact on them, that their children some were going to public school in the United States. And when I had to, you know, get them to do things and go encourage them, it was easier because of that connection to the US that they had by their children coming and attending elementary school or high school. The Prime Minister Hun Sen, his son went to West Point, and that. So when we had things to do, like we captured North Korean terrorists, and they turned him over to us and captured him on things. So it's, yeah. So it'll be terrible to lose some of that because they're afraid to send their children to the United States out of fear of what might happen to them.
Thank you. That was an extremely powerful answer. Just as we get close to the end of the conversation today, I'm going to put two questions together and pose them to you. One from Syed Hassan, who is a master's student in international communication. They ask, what might the most crucial characteristics or aspects of fostering citizen diplomacy? How can we bolster these? And I'm going to tie it to Ambassador Greta Morris's question, who references specifically your inspiring stories about citizen diplomacy with China. and the extent to which citizen diplomacy could help improve government-to-government relations with China. I'm wondering if we were to think about the most crucial characteristics, the core aspects of citizen diplomacy, whether those could be deployed today in spite of some of the challenges you outlined in US-China relations.
I believe that it's very, very important to get state legislators and other state level people to go to foreign countries. And that just to go and learn and exchange and be exposed to it, and having funds available to reach out to bring people, like the State Department International Visitor Program here, that we need to continue doing that. There is, I believe, and kind of a question, kind of an, I'd say, ethical question about how do Americans see our obligations to other people in the world. Do we only have an obligation to people in our own communities, to in our own country, to those outside our country? So whether it's Herbert Hoover, who, you know, from Iowa, who was president, failed president in the view of many, but perhaps America's single greatest humanitarian, who, working for Democrats, took food from America to feed 700 or 800 million people in Europe after World War I. Did it again working for another Democrat at the end of World War II. Norman Borlaug would say, you know, we have an obligation to help feed people all around the world to end hunger and malnutrition and poverty, starvation. But these now questions, I think, are being more posed, and it's, you know, different than it was immediately after World War II. And so I believe it's very important to try to stimulate among those who are now entering state legislatures, of course, members of Congress as well, but to encourage them to travel abroad. You know, it's kind of ironic somewhat that in a day when you could Zoom and we can have interaction with schools all around the world or with others in foreign countries, that perhaps we are becoming at the same time somewhat more distant and less connected. And that's very worrisome to me. And so the act, you know, the act of getting up and moving and going and having exchanges and bringing people so that you're meeting face to face, it's okay to do this, what we're doing here, but it's not the same as all being around the table and having those additional conversations and that understanding. And how do we foster that? So I've been bringing students from China here, from Hebei province, and English, who are learning English, and I want to keep doing that. And I was back in Hebei at the Shijiazhuang Foreign Language School, and I remember two things very distinctly. One, there was a young woman who was now in college and who got her phone out and started playing some songs by Taylor Swift. And it's that cultural connection that young people get when they're in high school. So I bring high school kids, and they start understanding and connecting to that other culture, and that sticks with them. And we should be bringing kids to go to college here in America, and building those kind of cross-cultural, deeper connections. And I ought to know who's, at the top of the, Chinese top 10 or top 20 songs that high school kids are listening to there. So, listen to, if you got Sirius XM radio, put on Hits 1, Channel 2, and recognize the songs that are there, because that's the language the 18, 16, and 17 and 18-year-olds. And in 20 years, they're going to be in charge of all these issues, and you have to inspire them to that.
Ambassador Quinn, thank you so much. That was a great look ahead to the future there at the end, and the role of future generations and future generations of leaders. Also, with a quick look to the future now, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Korf, the PDCA editor-in-chief, who's going to share some information about upcoming events. But Ambassador Quinn, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good afternoon. I am Michael Korf, and I had the privilege to serve as co-chair of the PDCA Awards Committee this year. And I want to begin by thanking Ambassador Quinn on behalf of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. He helped all of us better understand the opportunities involved in citizen diplomacy and the role we can all play. And I thank you all for your participation and excellent questions. Part of the mission of PDCA is to honor achievements of public diplomacy practitioners and scholars. The awards committee is one way we honor this part of our mission. We recently announced the awards for 2023, which you can read about on our website. To provide an opportunity for you to meet the recipients and to ask about their work, we have organized 2 upcoming programs. On June 5th, you will have the opportunity to meet 3 groups. Onar Distar, a cultural affairs assistant at the Consulate General in Istanbul, devised a strong strategy for connecting with Turkish youth using the field of game development and design to engage this audience. Monica Sarmiento, a public engagement specialist at the embassy in Mexico City, helped plan and coordinate more than 200 programs marking the 200th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and Mexico. And the third group is the Mobile American Corner team at the embassy in Tirana. The embassy's American Corners network covers 4 urban centers in Albania, but is absent in the rural countryside. To reach these underserved areas, the embassy's public diplomacy team created an innovative way to bring public diplomacy resources there by packaging the most effective American Corner programs, putting it on a US branded tour bus, and traveling around Albania. On June 12th, we will honor the public diplomacy section at the embassy in Kyiv. Serving under the most difficult and dangerous circumstances imaginable, the Kyiv embassy's public diplomacy section has carried out an extraordinary range of activities. Please join us to learn more. Another part of PDCA's mission focuses on advocating for the role of public diplomacy in US statecraft and for new initiatives and seeking new sources of support for public diplomacy activities. To address this part of the mission, on May 15th, we will focus on public diplomacy in the President's budget. Kate Eldridge and Michelle Weimer, who have previously addressed us about congressional deliberations over the public diplomacy parts of the budget, will join us. All 3 programs will be presented only via Zoom, and starting tomorrow, you can sign up for these programs on our website. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time and wish you a productive day.